All right, so let's talk about your time prior to Northwestern. How did you get into softball? Was it a familial thing? Did you just kind of show an interest and your parents pushed you in that direction?
Yeah, it it wasn't really a family thing. My dad was an athlete, but he actually played soccer. And so when I was young, I tried soccer and it just I didn't, wasn't my thing. And so I actually didn't start playing softball until I think I was 11. And I just, it was like, I think they wanted me to do something. And so softball, and actually I played basketball too. And I just started doing it. I had two older sisters who played a little bit, but they weren't, that wasn't what they liked to do. And so I tried out, like went to like the rec league and just loved it and started playing and met friends. And that's how I kind of got into it. And so that was it.
There is a contingent of student athletes who are dead set on early sports specialization, and there are some obvious benefits to doing it that way. For example, travel teams, early recruitment. When you join a sport like softball that is already so bent on travel teams at a young age, when you join a sport like that later on, how does your experience change?
Yeah. So, and I think my experience, it wasn't as young as it is now. And so for me, what I noticed is really when I was in middle school was where because I was really considered a two-sport athlete. So my basketball skills were probably as strong as my softball skills. And I loved playing basketball. But there was a lot of pressure even, when I was growing up, that you needed to specialize. And I think once you get on a travel team, now I grew up in the Midwest, so we didn't have the same training facilities that they have now. So I think lots changed in probably the last 10 to 12 years, maybe 15 years. And so sports specialization is a big push from coaches. It's also a big industry. So I mean, I think the elephant in the room is always, it's a money making industry. And so if you can get kids to specialize early, there's a financial and a perceived physical effect. I don't really believe in early sports specialization, so I'm probably biased to that. I think my ability to play both sports made me stronger in both, and also kept me in the game longer because I had those natural built-in breaks, and the mentality of the two sports is different. So and that's how I was driven.
When you were looking at getting recruited, what was the conversation about staying in the Midwest? I mean, staying in your general time zone.
So actually it's interesting because so financially I needed to be recruited. So a sports scholarship was important. So to stay, I grew up in St. Louis, so to stay local, there were a couple of local schools. So my parents were kind of pushing a little bit more for local. And so basketball, I had more of a chance playing Division II, Division III in the local St. Louis area. And, I wanted a good school also because I knew sports wasn't going to be, this was my chance to go to school. I was a first generation college student. So it was important to go. And so I had to choose. I looked at a couple of schools outside, but I think for my parents, they really wanted me to go to the University of Missouri to play softball, or they wanted me to go like WashU or, local. And I really wanted to go to Northwestern. So, which was in Chicago. So that was at the end of the day, I ultimately made the decision to go away. But I didn't have as much support in that decision. But I was fortunate enough to be able to have the financial aid and the scholarship opportunities to do that.
When you were looking at what you wanted to do at Northwestern, I mean, the life of a student athlete is already crazy, and they tend to go toward majors that aren't necessarily as demanding. When you were looking at something that you would relate to, but also felt like a challenge, where did you end up?
So I actually, so I was offered like a partial to go to Northwestern, and I actually was fortunate to get academic aid. So I ended up walking on at Northwestern, which was just from how it, like, from an aid package standpoint. But it was the school I wanted to go to, but I was not an engineer and I wasn't a journalist. So to be completely honest, I was scared of the math and the science. So I found the School of Education was the best fit for me, because I wanted to go into either sports marketing or psychology. And so, and that's actually a major that's a little less math and science based. So you do find a lot of, at least when I was in school, you did find a fair amount of athletes who went that route. So I think because I wasn't going there to be an engineer or a doctor or a journalist, I knew a little bit easier path.
When you were, I mean, I guess in general, how did your career at Northwestern materialize?
So I had a rough career at Northwestern, and for a variety of reasons. So first off, and is that when I walked on, it was it was a program that was very, was building. It was a top ranked program, and my coach was Sharon Drysdale. So I played at the towards the end with Sharon Drysdale. And so when I walked on, I was definitely a walk-on player. And I ended up, a player got hurt and I ended up being able to get into the starting lineup, and I pretty much stayed in the starting lineup. But I was definitely considered more of a defensive player as opposed to an offensive player. So it was a challenge, because I think the skills that I've learned around mental performance and mental health would have helped me a lot back in my playing days. So from a playing perspective, it was definitely challenging. I think there wasn't the for me, I lacked a lot of confidence, so I was constantly trying to prove my worth. And so I think that can be very challenging as an athlete. And then also there was, the Northwestern is, a really strong academic school. And so, I was used to excelling in school, and then I get to Northwestern and it's trying to balance. And a part of my academic was I had to do some work study programs. So I was kind of balancing school, works, and softball. So I would say the first couple of years were super challenging, and really did a number on my confidence and kind of how I saw myself.
What position were you?
I played shortstop and second base.
And then how long did you stay as a walk-on before you got your chance?
So I stayed as a walk-on my freshman year and sophomore, and then I earned a scholarship in my junior year. And during my junior year, my father passed away. And so I think I have some really great memories of college, but it was also very challenging, the road that I took. And my parents were they were as supportive as they could be, but they did not, I had a full ride to the University of Missouri Columbia, and that would have been a much easier road, I think, in their eyes. And, I think we all, you have that road that you don't know. You make a decision and it puts you on a path, and I don't regret it at all. But I think, it felt lonely at times. Like, hey, was this the right decision?
When
And
you were,
you weren't allowed to kind of show that vulnerability that I think is really important as an athlete, and as a student.
I mean, yeah, when we're talking about vulnerability, I don't think there's anything quite as vulnerable as waiting years for a spot that you believe that you've earned and no one is giving you a chance yet.
Yeah, and so in my situation, I was able, when I walked out, I was able to start pretty quickly, because of an injury, and then I was able to kind of stay in the lineup. But I think it's also that, like, and I think this is a struggle. I've talked to athletes, student athletes, and it can be a struggle. Like, if you're a full ride, if you're a partial, if you're a walk on, like, how does that affect your worth? If you walk in, and I see it in corporate a lot. Everyone has a role, and everyone has a place, but sometimes we place all of this emphasis on what are we getting paid, or what's our status, or what's our symbol. And so it can play with your psyche a lot.
I love talking to walk-ons because they all are just paying their dues, waiting for an opportunity, and their mindset is so normally so positive. It's
Yeah.
just like, I'm going to put in the work every day and this will pay off eventually. It's just not paying off now.
Yeah, and I think you do it. I know in my case, like, I really loved the game. By the time I was a senior, there were so many things, outside of the game that had affected me, and then there was things within the team, and just there were so many different things that happened that I didn't like the game for a little while. But I played because, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. All through high school, I played. I wanted to, but I also felt like I had to, because that was my way. Like, in my mind, that was how I was getting to school, and to a different, just to a different life.
When we talk about resilience, what is it about those who feel like they have a chip on their shoulder that makes them succeed?
I've been thinking about that a lot. And I'm not an outwardly competitive person. Like, I don't get in your face. Like, I watch athletes today, and like, I was watching the basketball, women's and men's, and baseball, and especially during the College World Series, and both softball and baseball, and how aggressive, like, celebrations are and things like that. And I was never that player, outwardly, but inwardly I had that chip. I had that, like, um, I want to be the best. And, I want people to know it, but I don't want to have to tell them. And so, I think that it's this drive to want to be, recognized. At least for me, that was part of what it was. And not always healthy, but sometimes, super healthy, right? So, I was playing cornhole the other day, and I still want to win. So,
What got you into the human performance psychology side of sport?
yeah, so when I graduated, I thought I was going to go into sports marketing, and I did an internship, and it felt like I was going to be in the same position forever. And I think this sounds bad, but I was tired of, like, trying to survive financially, and working long hours. And so, I went straight into corporate, and did marketing and, leadership type of work, and was working and just got burnt out. And I went and decided maybe I missed my calling. So I went and did a high school coaching job, and looked at possibly teaching. ended up knowing that I really like the coaching piece, but not the teaching part. And so I started working camps and things like that with kids. And right during the pandemic, I had decided I was going to leave corporate for good and start a consulting business around like working with teams, but I wasn't thinking about athletes. I was working on the corporate side with stress management, building resilience, emotional intelligence, those type of things. I ended up doing a program and an athletic director was in it. And she's like, hey, with your background, because I use a lot of sports examples. So she's like, hey, why don't you come try, would you speak to one of our college teams? And from there, it was just like, this is what I want to do. I could combine what makes teams from, an athletic standpoint to a work standpoint. A team's a team, and then, a performer's a performer. And when I got back into that environment, I realized how much the mental side of the game, whether it's, mental health, mental skills, mental performance, is neglected. I think it's changing, but it's still something that we know it's important, but we don't know how to integrate it. As coaches, I think it's challenging to know how to integrate it into their program, because you're doing a change of mindset for coaches also. So it just kind of happened. And then over the last 3 years, I've been doing more work with all different levels, high school, college, adult. And I've just kind of dived in and took a lot of what I know around leadership and performance and brought it back to what I know about as an athlete, and trying to combine those two.
When we're talking about positive psychology, it doesn't really even matter who the target demo is. Right? Like there's so much crossover. What is the most important thing that you've seen both sides of that spectrum needing?
I think that I think one is mindset is so important, and being able to understand how to control your mindset a little bit, which means that it's not every day is going to be rosy, but knowing like how your mindset can affect you. I also think, like, especially with positive psychology, a lot of it has to do with putting yourself in the best chance to succeed. And so, around habits and around strategies. So I spent a lot of time in corporate going through a lot of programs, and a lot of it is good information, but we're not given strategies or tools that can help us implement. And so I think, whether you're an athlete or you're in a job, you need those routines and habits and tools that'll help you be successful. And, the difference between like a positive mindset and a like more of a negative mindset is that you understand you're going to get knocked down, but that you get up. And I think that's where, as a lifelong athlete, I know that I can get up again. I know that like this run isn't going to be pleasant, but when I get done with it, it's going to feel better, right? And I think that's what happens in work too. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
I'm gonna go further down that kind of combination rabbit hole and ask specifics like mindfulness and breath work well developed in athletics. How do those principles translate into a corporate environment?
Yeah, so interesting enough, so breath work, what I'm finding with a lot of athletes is they understand the concept of breath work, as far as like, hey, I need to take some deep breaths, but they don't necessarily apply the tools sometimes that can be beneficial. So like if I'm going to kick a penalty kick in soccer, I can't do a bunch of deep breathing, but I can do like a physiological sigh. So I can take 2 breaths in and 1 breath out. So there's tools that help. So if I'm in corporate, one of the things that I work a lot with people on is when you walk in and you're going to have to give a speech, you get super nervous. So this is what everyone kind of knows. I've got to do a presentation. It's a big presentation, super nervous. So what are some tools, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's visualization, that can put me in the best position? Another one is conflict resolution. So like, you know, the more you lead people or the more you work for people, the more conflict happens. And so being able to use tools around getting myself, like we use breath work to get yourself centered so that you can have an intelligent conversation without, so it helps with self-regulation. So the more calm I am, the more I'm in my, you know, parasympathetic nervous system as opposed to my sympathetic nervous system, then I'm going to be able to have a conversation with you. If I do, you know, any kind of creative work, having tools like we teach around, like, you know, movement's really important. So the more you can get movement throughout your day, the more you tend, like if you have writer's block, sitting there staring at the paper won't help, but there are tools that you can do. So that's how you can integrate it in. And I just think, you know, as athletes, we know that they exist, but understanding where to integrate it in. And for coaches, like we work a lot with coaches to say, this doesn't have to be an hour of your practice. It just needs to start being part of your practice DNA, just like anything else.
Yeah. How can coaches utilize that kind of psychology framework as a strategic advantage?
So it's funny, I'm working with a team right now, and the first thing is getting everyone on the same page. You know, I think as coaches, the hardest thing is unless you can pick every athlete. So, you know, I think collegiately, yes, you can recruit, and but even with the portal, there's so many changes to your team that you know, if you can establish the culture of, you know, mental performance, mental health, where people walk in and they know, hey, this is a place that supports me. We put tools in place. We make it part of, like, you know, our basketball huddle. We do a couple of breaths, you know, or we add humor in because humor can relax us when, you know, instead of yelling at someone, you know, creating humor to relax the situation. So I think coaches can use it to create a culture that makes puts their athletes in the best chance to succeed. And we know that, like, tough love is important in some cases, but creating a calmer environment is where you get your most success. Because when you're in the zone, you're not like this, you're not tense, you're relaxed. And so most people, when they get yelled at, they don't relax, they get tense. So so I think creating an environment and a culture is where you can use it the best.
When you're looking at specifically the corporate side of the corporate piece of what you're doing, how many of those corporate individuals are former athletes? I mean, is there a crossover?
There's definitely a crossover.
And I guess secondarily, is that sector of the corporate world more in tune with how they feel? Like, do they take less swaying to get the concepts?
So I think it's, and I don't even like to say this sometimes because, like, I don't, like, in some ways it's generational a little bit. So I think, you know, the last couple of generations are growing up in a different sports environment than like my generation. We grew up in a very much like, you know, mental toughness was, if I get pushed down, I better get back up. And that's physical toughness. It's, you know, it's not mental toughness. So I think the catch-22 with athletes is that you're taught as an athlete to push through, and you're taught to, like, overcome things. And so I think sometimes, you know, you don't want to do that. You perceive any kind of mental performance or those type of things on the outside as something that is more vulnerable and is a sign of weakness as opposed to a sign of strength. So I think it depends. Like, there's not a blanket of like, I think former athletes are used to structure and they're used to process. And so they can get that. When we say, you know, focus on your process over the outcome, like if you've been an athlete or a dancer or, you know, like, I mean, like a sport, or you've done, you know, something where you've had routines and process, you adapt to this a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, I
But
feel
there are a lot of athletes, like not necessarily, you know, Division I collegiate athletes, but, you know, collegiate athletes that across the board that are working in corporate, or even like, you know, if you play a sport in high school and you chose not to play or couldn't play in college, you still have that athletic mindset. And so I think it's more the athletic mindset.
when you talk to those who work in corporate, how much is there an emphasis on things like goal acquisition? I mean, I know in sports we talk a lot about this is a goal, this is how we get there, this is the process. Is there a transfer over to working in a more structured corporate environment?
Yeah, I think so. In sales organizations, process and you know, structure are critical. You know, you have goals and you have revenue targets, things like that. And so, you know, I mean, I worked primarily in high tech, and I worked on the marketing side and then moved over onto the sales side. But I will say that, you know, a lot of corporate, like, so as a former athlete, I like hiring former athletes because I know that mindset. It doesn't mean that other people don't have that mindset, but you can relate to it. But I think what's important about it is that corporate is the same as, you know, a basketball team or a soccer team or a football team, in the fact that you've got positions, you've got roles that you need to do, and you've got goals. And so, and you've got a role to play. And so how are you getting everyone to move in the right direction? And organizations that are more successful normally can get their teams moving in the right direction. And organizations that struggle have those, like, you know, the bench player who feels like they should be in the game, and so they're talking about how bad the coach is, or, you know, or the star player who's like, hey, I'm better than everyone else, you know, you guys need to like just back off. Like, you get that in corporate just like you do in, you know, in more of a toxic culture.
That was a great answer.
Okay.
Now we're going to stray away from corporate and talk about entrepreneurship now.
Okay.
What was it about the conversations you had had up to the founding of Access Human Potential that led you to believe that there was a space for you? There was a need for what you could provide.
Yeah, so that's a more challenging question because, you know, I wish I could say that I'm always like completely confident that I make the right decision to go out on my own. But I think what I looked at was I wasn't happy. I didn't feel like I was making a difference in like my own like part of the world. So I felt like there was more that I could contribute that would make me feel, you know, partly make me feel better, and partly I could look back on my career and say, hey, I'm proud of what I did. And so I felt like I liked working with people to help them get to the next level. And I liked having autonomy. I wanted some flexibility, because I have kids. And so I wanted to be able to be a little bit flexible. And I wanted more control over making a living, like as far as, financially, and then also like who I worked with. Why I felt I could be successful is because, and partly because of being like, I mean, an athlete and a walk-on, is I felt like if I put my mind to it, that I could figure it out. I had a business background. I've ran budgets, like, so I understood all of that. I think the hardest part is just being confident enough in like myself, because I think sometimes you look and you're like, oh, well, I was successful because I knew this person and they gave me an opportunity, or I was successful because that wasn't really that hard to do, So I think it's one of the reasons why I like the work I do now, is because it forces me to do the work, to be the person that I'm trying to help other people be. And I used to say this when I gave hitting lessons. Like I used to, when I was coaching, I gave hitting lessons, and it made me a better hitter, because I had to focus on fundamentals to teach other people how to hit. And so it gets ingrained in your mind. And so that's kind of, I don't know if that answered kind of your question or not, but I wish I could say that every day I woke up and I'm like, this is the, like, I'm going to be the best of the best. I feel like I'm successful and I feel like I enjoy what I do. But it's still, there's years of, self-confidence issues that we all just have to work through. And I think being an entrepreneur, the great part is the flexibility. The tougher part is sometimes you feel like it's all you. And so I've found I have to surround myself with people that can help me put myself in check. And that can be hard when you're working on your own, because you feel like you should hold everything. And it's one of the things I work with a lot of my clients on is whether you're an athlete or you're trying to make it in, a profession, you need to be able to have people that can support you and build you up, as much as be honest with you about, hey, you need to make changes.
I loved what you said right before we left.
Okay.
About having freedom, but also needing structure as an entrepreneur. I feel like that is very applicable to those in individual sports. Not as much necessarily in team sports, but obviously there are sports like softball, like baseball, like soccer that have individual responsibilities. Like pitchers don't perform the same way that first basemen or outfielders do. Where is that transition into working for yourself by yourself?
Yeah, so I think I think you're right on. When it's truly an individual sport, like if you're a tennis player or you're a golfer, you can be part of a team, but it is individual. Although I think team sports are really individuals. Like you have your role, you have to do this, and that's kind of how. What's interesting about being an entrepreneur, or even if you work in a smaller organization, you wear multiple hats. So it's kind of like I'm playing 4 positions, as opposed to 1. So I have to know those 4. So if you're a utility player, I think it's easier as an entrepreneur because you're used to playing, multiple positions. If you're a specialist, and that's where I think sometimes organizations struggle, because if you're a specialist, so say you are someone who has done engineering your whole life and you decide to start your own engineering company, most of the time, what you really specialize in is only a piece of the business. So as an entrepreneur, if you don't have the skills of these other like roles of whether it's finance or it's marketing or it's sales, I think that becomes more of a struggle, and you have to figure out how to supplement those roles. And as an athlete, I think sometimes it's like that drive to be successful can get in the way a little bit, because it's harder to ask for help sometimes, because again, it's like I'm successful. Why do I need help? So that's how I see it. And then there's roles you like a little bit better. So like if you played a sport and you played multiple positions or did multiple things, you usually have a favorite. Like, like I like shortstop, but I played a lot of second, but I had my favorite position. Didn't mean I couldn't play others.
Do you find that there's a link between lifelong athletes and lifelong learners?
I think so. I think there's a link between how do I say it? So like, I think lifelong learners are the athletes that are lifelong learners are the ones that are looking for continuous improvement. And so, and it's more of a growth mindset. And I think not every athlete has a growth mindset. It's something we try to work with a lot, because success doesn't necessarily mean that you have a growth mindset. And so we used to say, good is the enemy of great, right? If you're good as a young athlete, that can hamper your progress because you're good. So, some people with a growth mindset are going to look at, yeah, I'm good, but I can be this. And that's more of a lifelong learner mentality. So that's kind of how I see it. So I think it's more of the mindset of an athlete that is really, that person who will take those extra reps, who, that will, and it's a fine line too, right? Because, that's how you get burnout. That's how you get hurt. We were just talking about this, about, patience, because, everyone says that progress isn't linear. And same with learning, right? I wish like you could read a book and it would just stick, but it doesn't work that way.
What is the perfect mindset for someone that you want to work with?
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
Like, what characteristics do they display?
I think, and again, this is my own craziness, I guess. I like, ideally you want someone who really like believes in that they want to, they're not looking at the outcome, they want to just be better than they were the day before. Like that's the ideal situation, where they're open, they want to go back and forth. So they're not just looking for someone to tell them what to do. They want to be, I like to work with people who have their own views of what they need, but are willing to bounce things off. Because again, it's not like, even when you do group work, the group learns more from each other than I think they should from like me or anyone who's doing the training. Like, you can guide and facilitate, but it's your experience, right? So that's the ideal. But I also like the people who are a little skeptical, that that know that there's something there, but they're not, they're more inquisitive, and they need to see a little bit of proof that it works. Because once you see that something is helping you, then you're much more committed, if that makes sense. So it's ideal to work with someone who's like, yeah, I just want to get better every day, and I'm going to put the work in. But that person who's like, hey, things have been going all right. I don't know why I'm having these problems, or I don't know why my team won't, like as a leader, why my team isn't, on the same page as me. And so then you can work with them and open up their open up your mind to seeing that there are some other things that can really make a difference.
I chuckled. I chuckled when you talked about skepticism because many episodes ago I had a coach on and they were talking about how when you're speaking to a team or a large group of people and you're trying to convince them of something, you basically break them up into thirds. One third will believe wholeheartedly, they will do whatever you tell them to do. And there will be a third that will not believe it, will not want to try it, will not want to participate in any way.
Yeah.
Neither of those groups are who you're talking to. You want to stay right in the middle group that is skeptical but willing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's exactly what you just said. And that's why I kind of chuckled when you said that, because I'm like, it's all about giving the chance that something will work.
Yeah. And you said it much more articulately than I did. So, but yeah, and that's it, and it's a big thing with like in organizational teams, is that a lot of times people spend a lot of energy either working with the really high performers or the really low performers. But in reality, what you want is you want that middle group that you can influence, because they've got the most potential to go either way. And so that's and it's not that you ignore either of the the thirds, but yeah, to your point, that's who that's where that's where you see the progress. And then a lot of times, not a lot of times, but sometimes you get that bottom third of, like, not bottom third, but the third that is super super skeptical, and it might move them up a little bit. So and I think that's the competitive challenge part of, like, for me, that's my that's kind of the challenge for me. But it also can be it can mess with your confidence, because if you try to change people who have no need, no willingness, no desire to, it can be tough on you.
What is it about a good coach that brings that initiative out of those who may be skeptical or may not even want to participate at all? I mean, what is it about a good coach that throws out enough little pieces of bread to attract the type of person that they want to influence?
So this is my opinion, and based on, like, what I've seen as a player and as a coach and as a parent, actually. I think that the good coaches don't try so hard to bring those people into the fold. I think that they meet them where they're at. And I think that's a critical piece of all coaching, is meeting a player where they're at. If I'm a high performer, I need to be met at that level. If I'm a super low performer, I can't be met at this, like, expectation that I should be up here. And so I think good coaches, it doesn't mean that you accept that, but it means that you acknowledge it. And I think sometimes we all just want to be acknowledged, because we've all been that high performer and that low performer in one way or another, whether it was, in a subject that you didn't like, or you had insecurities about. Because sometimes the low performer, it has to do with insecurity, it has to do with confidence, it has to do with a lot of things. So, I think the most success I've had is trying to meet people where they're at. And I think that's what, like, it's human nature. And sometimes we try to force it. And I think once you try to force it, you lose that person.
What does the sign behind your head say?
Oh, it says,
We're on the topic.
it says, A good coach can change a game. A great coach can change a life.
Well, how fitting is that?
That's the goal, right?
Let's
So,
talk more about your business. Who is the target demographic broken down between sports and your business kind of sectors?
yeah, so sports, we'll start with sports. So sports is really, I kind of have two areas. So I do teams. So normally high school travel teams, and then collegiate is the two, you know, targets, and really teams that are looking. So I do some one-off programs like an introduction to mental performance or stress management, or I could do a lot around healthy lifestyle. So like how important rest, social interaction, movement, those things, which, you know, I always laugh because people will be like, well, they're athletes, they're moving, like no matter what sport you're, but there's a difference between getting movement and being like working out. So anyways, so those, the team aspects, and I work with both the coaches, the teams, and parents when applicable. So obviously travel, high school, parents are a little bit more applicable than in college. Although, again, with the portal and things going on in collegiate athletes or athletics, I think the parents might be a little bit more, there's got to be ways to address the parents in certain situations. Again, it's not like I keep saying my generation, but you know, like when you went off to college, like you were off there and coaches were only talking to you. And I think it's, you know, there's a change going on right now a little bit, whether people like it or not. But so that is the one part. The second one is I do individual. So I work with individual athletes, a lot of times helping them get ready for the next level. Or like if it's, you know, or they're having, I'd like to be doing more proactive, but a lot of it is more reactive. Like they're having struggles, and so now they want to have changes. The struggle with any of these programs is that there's still a skepticism a little bit in certain areas. So a lot of people want to kind of try, and it's kind of like if you want to do weightlifting, you can't do a week of weightlifting and, you know, be stronger. So I try to work with teams more seasonal, like for the season, or at least meet with them, you know, 2 to 3 times during the season. But teams in high school, college, and travel, and then individual athletes. Usually, the individual athletes are usually high school and collegiate. So those are the main demographics for the sports.
Yeah.
And on the corporate organizations, it's really, I really target teams in organizations. So I have a big high tech background because I've worked in high tech most of it, but I also do things in different industries because, to your point, you know, a team's a team, right? And what we're training on, or what I'm training on, is more on the mindset piece of it. And so that's not, I'm not teaching them how to sell their products. I'm not, you know, just like I started working with a football team, and one of the discussions was like, well, you know, like it's a football team. And I'm like, I'm not teaching the quarterback how to throw. I mean, I can throw, but I'm, you know, I understand plays, but I'm working with the coach. So I'm not calling plays, but I'm trying to get them in a position like when your wide receivers, you know, running 4 different plays in his head when he really needs to be running one. Like that's what I'm trying to help him with. So does that
Yeah.
answer? Yeah. Okay.
And then generally, I mean, we talked about the demographics of your offerings. Let's talk specifics. I mean, what's your programming look like? If I was an athlete working with you, what would I be looking forward to each week?
Fun. So, I try to make it a systematic, a process approach. And I think that's really important. And uh, and that's more of the athlete mindset also. So, we would identify kind of where you're at and what your short-term goals are, like where you're struggling. Is it around the habits that you have? Is it around like, I want to be here, but the work I'm putting in is only going to get me to right here. So a lot of it is, we're talking, what's your mindset? How do we get you to more of a growth mindset? If you're already at a growth mindset, then what are these habits? What are these techniques? A lot of times I work a lot in the beginning with teaching around breath work and around ways to complete the stress cycle. And so what I mean by that is, like, we're constantly integrated with stressors, and most of the time we don't do things to help us get out of that stress mode. And especially what's interesting is movement and exercise is a great way to de-stress. But if you are playing on a team where movement and exercise is part of your stressor, it can be counterintuitive. So, if I was working with you, we'd first identify kind of where you're at and where you want to go. And then we put into place, what are those tools that you need to do, and how do you get consistent with those? And sometimes it is all mental. It is all around how I'm showing up, what I'm thinking, what my self-talk is, things like that a lot of times we're too, either we don't think other people will understand, or we don't feel safe enough to say those things out loud. So
when you're working with athletes, do they have a background in mental health? Do they come from teams or programs with coaching staffs that have prioritized mental health, or are you really teaching the basics?
So it depends. My first couple, they had like yoga programs. They had, programs that they were already looking at the athlete as a whole. But most don't. And, like when I first started, I went out and got it's a mental health first aid certificate. I don't know if you've seen it, like it's starting to become a lot like more popular, because what I realized is, because I'm not a therapist, but if you create relationships with the athletes, then, it's important that you can understand, like, when maybe they need to be referred to someone in the mental health field versus, mental performance and things around stress and anxiety. And so I think what I've seen is a lot of the athletes that I work with don't really understand stress, anxiety. They don't understand what their self-talk is doing. So it's not that coaches haven't done that. I think it's just that you only have a certain amount of time as a coach, and you're used to working on, the basics. Like, my daughters are in cheer, and it's like they have to work on their formations, their cheers, their conditioning. And so the mental piece of it comes out when the performance isn't what they thought it was. So that's why I mean, like, it's more reactive than proactive. And I'm trying to get teams and athletes to make it a little bit more proactive. So I've had a couple, but most of the people don't have haven't been introduced to what this kind of like mental performance can help them with.
How much of accessing human potential is accessing mental wellness?
So if you would have asked me this 3 years ago, I'd say, a little bit, but it's really about like learning emotional intelligence. And I would say now it's just like performance. It's 80%, 90%. With the idea that you have the basics. So like I just did a leadership program and we taught the basics around communication, conflict, leadership skills. But then we talked about, okay, if I'm going to do good in conflict, like, so if you and I I'm going to have a difficult conversations with you. If I go in heightened, that conversation's not going to go great. And that's a mental piece. It's not a skill set. It's how do I get, like, I know how to active listen. I know all the things I'm supposed to do, like pay attention, focus on you. But if I'm not like centered, then I can be looking straight at you and not hear anything you say. And that's a mental piece. So I think it's 80%, but most people would say, no, we want the skills, like we want the tools that will make us better. So as an athlete, you have to have that physical component. But once you have that physical component and you're in the game, you can't teach physical anymore. So it's how do you trust your body enough to do what needs to be done? And it's the same with like a difficult conversation. I can't learn how to have a difficult conversation in the middle of it. So I would say about 80%.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I feel like it's a fine line between peak physical performance and peak mental performance, but those who have it figured out have it figured out.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, I think there's a question, what's the difference between a good player and a great player? And it's not always the physical skills. It's that it's that mindset. It's that person who will take that extra shot, or it's the person that, like, I'm on the golf course and I need to hit a birdie. I know I can do it. I can do it 20 times in practice. What happens when I'm, what happens when I'm in that position. And I think, to your point, the great players, learn how to harness that. I know for me, like early in my career, when I got up, like if I was shooting a free throw or I was up to bat and there was nothing on the line, I was fine. And when there was something on the line, I was thinking about all the ways, like I had a more of a negative mindset. And now I go, like, I play slow pitch and semi-competitive, and and like I get up now and it's like I take a couple breaths and I'm like, hey, I'm just going to try to go with my basics. Not always successful, but it has changed. Like it, and maybe it's just because I don't feel the same pressure, but I still want to win. And so I think how you can harness that once your physical skills are at a certain level is the game changer.
Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about that we did not discuss? I am done with my questions. The floor is yours.
No, I mean, I like, you ask a lot of questions, like a lot of good ones that I hadn't even thought about. And I think you helped relate how they're, I think especially for athletes that are towards the end of their collegiate career, or even like not even at the end of their collegiate career, but are looking like they're still going to play, but it's going to be different. Because when you're in college and you're playing, that's a high, like it's a high priority. And once you're out, it's not as high a priority. It may still feel like it, but it's not. And so I think the skills and the tools that you can learn as an athlete transfer over to everything that you do. I mean, it transfers over, like I joke about it, parenting. Like I have 3 kids and I have twins, and it was like, sometimes it's like that workout that never ends, and you're like, it's going to end, and you just got to push through it. And that was sometimes how it was, like when they were little and you were just trying to, like, nap time and all of those things. So I mean, I joke about it, but I think these skills are transferable, and the younger that you can learn them, the more benefit you can have, but it's never too late. I mean, I've changed my mindset a lot over the last few years.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to add to your story? Anything you wanted to clarify? I'm looking up right now when your episode is coming out.
Okay. Yeah, I don't, I think I was part of a collaborative book, but it's targeted towards it's fearless female leaders. So I wrote a chapter, and that just came out. So it's on Amazon, and there's, I think, 8 or 10 other authors in it. But it actually, what's interesting about it is I kind of did write the story of growing up through, like, college and how I got to where I am today, kind of some of the stuff we talked about. But I think the biggest thing is, just hoping that, the people listening will look at mental performance and mental health as something to share and to talk about. I think that's what a lot of us that are in this field are trying to open up, because I know my collegiate experience and even after college would have been so different if I could have felt safe enough to express the things I was going through. And it's not easy, but I think the more that you can share, the more you realize that we all have stuff that we struggle with. And sometimes, it's funny, like they always tell the story of, the person who, like, feels like if you take softball or baseball, they can't hit anything. It's like, the ball looks like the size of a golf ball. And then the guy next to you is, the ball looks like a beach ball, and they're hitting everything. It doesn't matter. Like, they reach their bat out and it goes into, like, right field, and you're hitting line drives, and they're, people are catching it. And I think, we have to remember that's what sports teaches us, is, like, failure happens, and what's the thing we're going to do next. And that's what we try to teach with mental performance. And I hope that that more people do that, because I think it helps society in general.
Well, I think that's a great way to end this episode. So your story will come out on September 27th.
Okay.
So you have a while.
Okay.
If anything happens between now and then, anything exciting, anything that you would like to add to the script, send me a DM. I'd be happy to add it. Once we get closer to the date, I'll reach back out and just see if there's anything else you wanted to add. Other than that, I'll talk to you then. I hope you love the episode. Thanks so much for sharing with me.
Oh, no, thank you. And if you see anything, or, I get, like, I don't know, I try to stay on message, but if, hopefully this was okay. And
yeah.
But if there's something you think would be beneficial for me to add, let me know.
Yeah, okay. I appreciate just general lifelong athletes. I have a lot of them on this podcast, and they turn into fantastic sports psychologists and fantastic coaches. And I think it's so important when we're talking about the scope of mental health to not just inundate the podcast with current athlete, because there's so many people that contribute to the holistic student athlete. And it's people like you who really help to round out this conversation. So I appreciate you coming on and talking it.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, and it's interesting because I think that approach is when you're in the middle of it, it's important that you hear from people who are in the middle of it. But you can also, depending on who's talking, I mean, like, it is tough to be an athlete right now. Like, it was tough when I was an athlete for different reasons, but the pressures and the demands, and social media, like all of these things that you hear all the time, you hear that, but the reality is that is a challenge, like, because you're still like, we're all still growing up, whether you're 18 or you're 45 or whatever, like so I think as a student athlete right now, you do want to hear from people who are going through it and ways that they're getting through it, but being on the other side of that, but also realizing that, hey, this is not the same as it was when I was an athlete, but a lot of the tools that I wish I would have known can benefit you now. I think is kind of critical, because it's a tough world out there, and each generation has it. I mean, it just, comes out differently. But the great things about being an athlete right now are also some of the things that can be pretty challenging. And that line, it gets better and all of that, it really does. Like, you take the training that you have to know that the progress isn't linear, but when you look back, you see that you're making it. So
Love that.
So
Thanks for spending time.
I appreciate it too. I mean, I appreciate you reaching out, and I'm glad that I could be a part of it, and hopefully add a little bit of value. And I think the work you're doing is great. And if there's anything I can do for you, let me know.